Welcome to Alpha Talks Editors Roundtable, what moved the markets this week for the week ending Friday, July 24th, 2020. I am joined once again by the panel of Seeking Alpha editors, Aaron Task, VP Contributor of Content, Bradley Olison, VP of News, Stephen Alfer, Managing Editor of Breaking News, and me, the host, Nathaniel Baker, contributing editor here at Seeking Alpha. Okay, a pretty eventful week, considering that it's late July. Stocks rallied early in the week. We had a certain electric vehicle company that recorded earnings that beat estimates. And then we had some Sino-US tensions rearing their ugly head, which led to some risk off. We also had the S&P break through the June 8th high early in the week. That is no longer the case as we record this on Friday around noon. And we're still holding on to gains for the week, but only just. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen. Of course, we had a lot of earnings this week, not just Tesla. So let's get into it, starting as we always do with Aaron. Aaron, what's your take on the events of the week?
Well, you hit the nose in the head, Nathaniel. There was a lot that happened this week. This was not a sleepy summer kind of week. I mean, as you mentioned, the S&P 500 hit a 5-month high on Wednesday and broke out of that trading range we've been talking about a lot. The June 8th highs went right past it, and it looked like, all right, the bulls are firmly in charge. And then we got that big sell-off on Thursday. The other thing notable is, the underperformance of the mega cap tech stocks. Microsoft had a big sell-off after its earnings. And as we talked about last week, there was a little bit of what could they possibly say to continue the momentum. A lot of weakness in Apple too. Some concerns about, on the antitrust front. There's a hearing that's scheduled in Congress to look at that. It was postponed because of John Lewis's memorial, but it's going to be happening next week. And then, as you mentioned, the U.S.-China tensions ratcheting up, and it's interesting to me is I feel like there's been more talk about the consulates being shut down than Secretary of State Pompeo's speech on Thursday, in which he said, quote, "Securing our freedoms from the Chinese Communist Party is the mission of our time." And he basically went on to say that, either we tackle the CCP or they're going to take over the world. I mean, it was very stark, some stark rhetoric there.
I'll quickly just add a line from Pompeo's speech. If we bend a knee now, our children's children may be at the mercy of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, that's height of Cold War hysteria kind of talk.
Yes, exactly.
One can almost imagine like the generals surrounding JFK back in the early 60s saying that kind of thing, like Curtis LeMay or something like that. So it is an election season, but still that's pretty fiery stuff.
Yeah, and one thing that we haven't even mentioned is coronavirus. Now, some things just hitting the tape here. Dr. Fauci, who, by the way, threw out a terrible first pitch at the Washington Nationals game.
We don't have to pile on there.
Night. Yeah, okay, fine, fair enough. I won't pile on, you're right. But that was bad, man. Jeez. Anyway.
That was bad. But the COVID news and the initial jobless claims, like breaking a 15 straight week of declining and still 18 straight weeks over 1 million. I mean, and that's still well above the peak that we got to during the great financial crisis. I mean, the employment challenge in this country is getting, it's really grim here.
Bradley, what were the winners and losers this week?
So obviously we're getting to a point in our earnings season where all those correlations are breaking down. We talked at length over the past couple of weeks about a virus on, virus off trade. And we're seeing a lot of that just go to the sidelines at this point with the myriad earnings that we had. That being said, there were still a couple of those standouts on the virus on factor. You had a variety of casinos were some of the biggest losers this week with Wynn Resorts, Las Vegas Sands. Granted, those two had company-related incidences of weakness. Las Vegas Sands had some pretty terrible results out of Macau, I believe, and Wynn Resorts kind of reaffirmed the fact that they are laying off a bunch of workers. That gets to our earlier point about the employment situation is rather dire in the real economy. You also had Caribbean Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, Norwegian, those were some of the biggest losers this week. I'd like to point out to some of our readers, if they're interested, our founder, David Jackson, did an interesting item on some of the most poorly rated names getting some of the biggest uptake in Robinhood ownership this week. Norwegian Cruise Line was one of those. I think it's important for some of the retail traders, the inference he was making was that people are just buying anything that's beaten down, regardless of their true fundamentals of the stock. Some of these stocks are rated rather poorly as far as the Seeking Alpha platform's quant rating system, and also Wall Street and some of our contributors rating. But on the winner's side, I'd like to point out you have a couple home builders where some of the standouts. You had Pulte and NVR, and just Friday, new home sales blew out expectations. I think close to 14%. So Pulte, and you also have TriPoint, which also did well in the pre-market. A lot of the new home sales data. So we talk about the employment picture, but these home sales figures are relentless. The biggest winners are I guess a lot of the money was going into the $200,000 to $300,000 range. So the real economy, I guess, at least as far as home buying is concerned, is healthy. The XHB, which is the ETF that tracks a lot of these home builders, has outperformed the SPX. This S&P 500 on a very interesting rate here. They've beat them on the 1 week timeline, 1 month timeline, 6 month timeline, year to date, and over the past year. So we love to talk about these mega techs leading the way, but the home builder index has also done quite well. And I guess just to kind of bring it back full circle to some of that mega tech movement we saw on Thursday, some of that, who knows if that was a little bit of a sell the news reaction. We're getting some of these big names like Tesla coming out and Netflix last week, which just thrown a little cold water on this rally. But I think we're going to have to wait to see if there's going to be any more negative catalysts next week with some of that congressional antitrust meetings that will move forward.
All right, a lot of earnings, a lot of corporate news. Stephen, what was the take there?
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing to Bradley's point. New home sales were not just up strongly from June to May. New home sales in June were up 7% higher than they were a year ago, when the economy was doing quite well and unemployment was 3.5%. So pretty remarkable numbers there. In other earnings news, I'll go away from some of the kind of the obvious big ones. I was interested in some words out of the Discover Financial earnings call, where the CEO was talking about charge-offs and delinquencies, and he said the data right now is actually fine. Everything's kind of holding up very well on that, but that they expect Q4 for charge-offs and delinquencies to begin to rise and to continue to rise all through 2021. They don't see it tapering off until 2022. So whether some selling we're seeing is some sell the news stuff, or whether it's the realization that we've got a kind of a second wave of an economy downdraft coming, remains to be seen.
Gold hitting $1,900 an ounce. Friday, it's had a big move.
And silver too.
Years, really. And silver, like really explosive move on a percentage basis off, very low base. On our next episode of Alpha Trader, we have Lynn Alden Schwartzer, who's one of the authors of the Stock Waves service and marketplace. And we talked to her about this. And she mentioned that the gold to silver ratio back in March had gotten to the most extreme it had ever been, meaning, this is silver's time to catch up. But she's, long-term bullish on both of those, precious metals in general, and a reflation trade in general. And you see what's happening with the dollar. And I think a lot of people, are thinking maybe we've reached the limits of what we can do in terms of deficit spending without hurting the dollar. Now, I'll put a caveat in there and saying people have been saying that for 10 plus years, and it hasn't come true.
Or more,
yeah, or more, right? But it does seem like there's more conventional wisdom coming around to the idea that maybe the dollar's day in the sun is starting to break up here, and that could be for geopolitical reasons. Could be just because of what the Fed is doing and what's happening on the fiscal stimulus side, or the combination of all of those things. Again, and I should note that Lynn also, she thought there might be a reversal coming in the strength of precious metals against the dollar, and the dollar might get a bounce here, especially if the tensions between the U.S. and China really ratchet up further. But the longer term trend, she thinks, is downward pressure on the dollar and more strength in the reflation trade, which again, something that people have been looking for a long time, but maybe it's finally upon us.
And that might be something U.S. policymakers don't really have too much of a problem with.
Right.
Although policymakers abroad might have a problem with that.
That's right.
Yeah. Although with the whole U.S. dollar losing its reserve currency thing, you still need something to replace it. And there just don't seem to be any viable options, at least not any big ones, right? I mean, it's not going to be the RMB. I'm sorry. The Chinese yuan, like people in China want to get out of that currency. So I don't see that as being a replacement for the USD, and the euro has all kinds of its own mess. Now, gold, maybe that could be something. Don't come to me with crypto, but maybe, who knows?
Are we doing the gold standard? I mean, that would be fitting for Judy Shelton's nomination, right? So.
Exactly. Yeah. For the record, Lynn Alden Schwartzer is not calling for the dollar to lose its reserve status. She's just saying, weakness. It's likely to weaken against other major currencies. But I will note Jim Reed, who's a chief credit strategist at Deutsche Bank, said, quote, "I'm a gold bug. I think fiat money will be a passing fad in the long-term history of money." So now, maybe the arc of history bends towards gold. I don't know.
Maybe.
But again, these things are getting, I would say, bad pun, getting more currency in the mainstream of Wall Street than they would have a few years ago.
He did there. Yeah.
I saw what he did there. Yeah. And to Brad's point, Judy Shelton, she's through the first hurdle in terms of her nomination in the Fed, and she has been in the past at least an advocate for return to the gold standard. So that'll be very interesting if she does become a Fed governor.
And for the record, I think that's a good pun. That's a good pun, Aaron.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate
good one.
that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And here's a good lead in to our next segment, where we talk about favorite articles that we've seen on Seeking Alpha or elsewhere in the news universe. And my favorite, I'll start this week with that lead in, is Harrison Schwartz's piece here. These 9 silver miners are a basket of opportunity. To Aaron's point earlier about silver being mispriced to gold and silver now going on a massive run. And he says, Harrison does, that there are silver miner ETFs which are attractive, but better returns can likely be found by picking the best of the best. And he has these 9 ideas here. I'm not going to give them away. You'll have to read the story. But that was my favorite piece of the week with everything that's going on. So what about you, Stephen? What was yours?
My favorite piece was a news item. Bill Ackman has a special purpose acquisition company, otherwise known as a blank check company. It went public this week, raising $4 billion. It's the largest SPAC by a long shot, probably triple the next largest. And SPACs, as I don't want to call it a bubble. Everybody's quick to rush into the bubble talk, but a bit of a mania going on with SPACs. And Ackman was interesting. He went on CNBC this week after the IPO, kind of talking it up. And he said it's just the IPO process can get broken. And he pointed to WeWork as an example. My first thought was WeWork is proof that the IPO process works, because the process threw that thing out.
Yeah, agreed.
All you had to do was look at their S1 and realize, there's no way I'm going to invest in this thing. So I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah.
And if I could jump in on that, I think it's a nice segue, because I think on that, later on in that interview, Bill Ackman mentioned that he had bought a Tesla car.
Right.
And I think that builds on one of my favorite stories, which is also thematic. I did that last week. I think it might be cheating according to the rules of the game here. But, just to talk about it, Tesla was, I think we had 4 or 5 stories, which were some of the most read this week. And for good reason. There was catnip for everyone. You had Elon Musk reaching his payday for his compensation package. It's $2.1 billion, I think, in stock was just opened up in terms of, because of the valuation in the company, which has remained elevated for as long as it has over the past 6 months. Obviously, we have to keep in mind that takes 5 years. He's got to hold that stock for 5 years before he can actually cash in on it. I think that's kind of a nuance that's missed in a lot of the stories. But I think that, that was a big story this week. I don't want to do a victory lap. I think I was.
You do. Yes, you do.
Maybe.
Yes, you do. Yes.
So I will just put it out there that I put $1,500 as as that level that Tesla seems to gravitate towards. And, I won't make another prediction, nor did I make it last week, but I won't make a subsequent one because lightning, won't strike twice here. But, it has been fluctuating around that level. It soared after earnings. That being said, there was some healthy profit taking, I think, in Tesla. The market cap is massive. I think if it were to be added to the S&P 500, it'd be the 10th largest. That put it on par with companies like JP Morgan, Home Depot, Walmart, just to put some perspective in there for you. So definitely that was one of the biggest stories today, or this week rather, for me. And I think that's just something to be aware of going forward in the Tesla story.
Yeah, Bradley, I must say I have to admit I'm a little disappointed. We had Kim and Kanye drama. We had a new Taylor Swift album, and you go back to Tesla. But all right.
Elon Musk is a celebrity at this point.
Yes, he is.
Indeed.
He's a household. He's a household name, and I gave you Leonardo DiCaprio last week. So,
yeah,
right.
yeah. But come on,
so
Kim and Kanye drama, man. No.
I'm gonna stick with Tesla for one of my favorite stories of the week by Lewis Stevens. I love the headline: Tesla, excuse me, 1999 is calling. He basically compares Tesla to Cisco circa 1999, 2000, and on a valuation basis, there's a lot of similarities. Although he notes that on a price to sales basis, Tesla is quote unquote cheap compared to where Cisco got it at its peak, which means it could have much more room to the upside. He's not predicting that, and neither am I. But if Tesla becomes everything that it could possibly be, and I agree, it's much more than a car company. It's got to be $1 trillion market cap at some point soon, right? In this cycle, right? Before the peak. And I don't know if those stocks, if that $2+ billion grant's going to be in the money in 5 years, but I think there's just so much momentum behind this name. They're doing the next big plan in Austin. It feels like they can't do anything wrong at the moment, and that the bears have just had their heads handed to them so many times, and maybe that's where it peaks. But I wouldn't be ready to call a peak in Tesla anytime soon. Just because things, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. I think Tesla embodies that. On the flip side, I will go back to gold for my other selection of the week from Avi Gilbert, who writes the Market Pinball Wizard service on Marketplace. He's an Elliott waiver. He's been very bullish on gold. He actually says, though, if you own gold, look out below. He's expecting a near-term retreat for gold. And again, we've had a lot of extreme swings and a lot of assets, and gold being one of them. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if there was some pullback in gold, and that's what Avi is calling for here as well.
So no one's going to mention Davey Day Trader meeting Trump. I mean, are we really just going to let that go? But all right, fine. Does anybody know what they talked about there? I mean, what was that?
Has it been posted yet? Or
I just saw photos.
okay, yeah, I just saw a still photo.
Yeah, that's why we haven't talked about it, because we don't know what was said.
Right. Plenty to speculate about there, but
yes.
All right, cool. Well, I guess that's a good way to wrap. WRAP, not RAP. We would not do that to you. So let's close this week. Thank you all for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you all again next time.